I'm Hemant Mehta.
This is Jessica Blumke.
And you're listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com. Jessica recently attended the Amazing Meeting, a skeptics conference in Las Vegas, where she had the chance to talk to a number of amazing people.
For this episode, I sat down with philosopher and writer Dennett, and we spoke about the term atheist and its alternatives, his latest project called Caught in the Pulpit, which is about preachers who no longer believe in what they preach, and the culture of Americans who prefer to stay put as opposed to travel around the country or world. Welcome to the Friendly Atheist podcast. This is Jessica Blumke. I'm sitting here today with Dan Dennett. I would like to give your credentials.
Well, I'm a professor at Tufts. I've written a lot of books, including Breaking the Spell, and more recently on this topic with Linda Lascola. We published a book called Caught in the Pulpit, Leaving Belief Behind, about her wonderful confidential interviews with closeted, non-believing clergy who still have churches, congregations, they're still in the ministry, but they no longer believe what their congregations expect them to believe. And they're very interesting people. It's a very moving story, actually.
And I think a lot of our listeners will probably recognize you as one of the four horsemen of the atheism movement.
So-called, yes.
Do you like that term?
I don't mind. I'm glad to be a part of it. I think there's other atheists who wish they were in the charmed circle and probably deserve just as much or more than I do, but I'm proud to be one of them.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about just kind of the term atheist. Last night, we're here at TAM, which I did not say in the intro. We're here at TAM2014. I've been trying to find people to come on the podcast. And actually last night, I approached a couple of people who are fairly prominent, that a lot of people recognize their name, both of whom declined, saying they didn't want to be associated with the term atheist.
Oh, really? Well, okay.
Do you have any thoughts? Has that been something that...
Well, I was the American spokesperson, not the coiner, but the American spokesperson for the term bright. That was coined by two retired California school teachers, science teachers, as a better term for humanist, atheist, freethinker, agnostic for that matter. And they reasoned, I thought quite compellingly, that the term homosexual is a very bad, has very many bad connotations. Gay was a brilliant political stroke. It was a term that already had a meaning, and a very positive meaning, and it was simply hijacked.
Right.
And so they said, let's hijack the term bright for us. And it didn't catch on. Actually, the Brights movement is still going and going strong. They have lots of members all over the world. But it has not become, it has not spread, it hasn't gone viral. The number of people who will call themselves Brights is in the tens, maybe hundreds of thousands, but not millions. The idea that the term atheist has a lot of bad connotations for obvious reasons, largely because the theist community keeps it that way.
Right.
I myself have no hesitation to say I'm an atheist, and I would rather take the sting off the term and say, oh, of course I'm an atheist. Aren't you?
Right. Do you think people who are an atheist and who have the ability to say they're an atheist without persecution or fear of risk of harm, do you think those people have a responsibility to kind of soften the blow for those who maybe live in a part of the world that...
I think something like that, yes. I think that if you do a few experiments by simply, if you're one of those atheists who just keeps it to yourself, do a few experiments and find half a dozen times in the next month when you just casually let it drop that you're an atheist. Don't make a big deal of it. Don't proselytize. Just, atheists like me don't. And see what effect it has. I found that people they respect it, and if they themselves are one of you, and they very often are, they're thrilled.
Yeah.
I say, oh, me too,
yeah.
me too. And I think atheists have no idea what their numbers are. And non-atheists have no idea. They don't realize how many of their acquaintances, some of your best friends are atheists. Your doctor may be an atheist. Your children's teachers may be atheists. The nice policeman down the corner, he may be an atheist. And it's good for people to realize that.
Yeah. Do you think, so obviously we're sort of shifting, there's clearly more people who either self-identify as an atheist or simply fail to identify as any, any particular religion. Do you think, how far do you think that's going to slide? Do you think we're going to get to a majority point at some day?
Well, we have some good examples. Europe has already tipped over that mark quite easily, and they wonder why it's taking us so long.
Right.
I think the level of animosity against atheists in this country is still so high that it'll take a while. People say, how long do you think before we have an atheist president? I say, you've had lots of atheist presidents. They just haven't been willing to admit it, because then they wouldn't have been president. But I think the day of a self-avowed atheist president, I hope to live to see that day.
Yeah.
And once that happens, the dam will have broken.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the strengthening of the atheist movement has also kind of served to galvanize the more religious who, I don't know, feel threatened by our
Well, they
existence?
certainly do feel threatened, but they were already galvanized.
Yeah.
And we're just the latest wave in the tidal wave of difficulties that they're having. I think they're all running desperately now.
Well, what is it about the UN? Like you mentioned, Europe is becoming more and more secular. And despite the fact that some places like England have a national religion, whereas the U.S. doesn't. But
some people think that having a state religion is actually the royal road to atheism. Rodney Stark and his colleagues argue that the sure way to kill religion is to nationalize it, because then it becomes a sort of civil service job, and it's filled with people who this is a very sort of right-wing economic view that says free market for religion keeps the religions on their toes and fosters competition. Now, there's probably something to what he says. I'm not convinced that he's right, but I'm sure he's partly right. I think a lot of it has to do with the still remarkable isolation of a lot of Americans. If you simply see which Americans have passports and which don't, and look at their views, their religious and political views, there's a striking, very significant difference. There are all these people that they don't ever want to leave the United States, the best place in the world, and they'd be shocked if they went to Europe and saw how much nicer and cleaner and more modern many of the facilities are in other places, and realize that America is beginning to look a little threadbare. That would shock them, but it probably wouldn't shock them out of their religious beliefs.
Sure. Well, do you think the idea that a lot of American, and I don't pretend to know the number off my head, but a large number of Americans don't hold passports, do you think that's just sort of because of our physical isolation? Obviously at Canada and Mexico, but other than that, if you want to travel internationally, it's a 6-hour flight and it's not cheap.
Well, I think that has something to do with it, of course. And it's also a matter of local traditions. After all, most people, until the 20th century, only moved sort of 5 or 10 miles from the point of their birth to the point of their death. The circle you could circumscribe around the lifetime travels of most people was pretty small. And that only changed with the modern transportation era, and again, only for a minority of people. I had a dear neighbor, now deceased, in Maine, who I asked him what traveling he'd ever done. He said he went to New Hampshire once. It was a dog show. He went to entered his dog in a hunting dog show in New Hampshire. And aside from that, he'd never been out of the state of Maine his whole life. Didn't see any reason to.
Well, I lived in Montana for a little bit in a very small town, populated 500 or so, and I met people who had never left the state. And it was, Montana's great. I don't want to dig on it, but it's really interesting that people just don't have that desire to see something different.
And I don't think we know the effects, obviously many and multiple and competing, that the modern media have on this. Maybe you spend your whole life in Montana, but if you're watching James Bond movies and television programs, you're going to see other parts of the world and think you know them.
That's an interesting point.
And the need to travel may be actually diminished. So why do I want to go to Paris? I've seen it in the movies. I've seen London in all kinds of movies, and they think they know. And there's fear.
Sure.
They don't know if. I think the first time somebody goes abroad, there's a little anxiety. There's a threshold of anxiety.
Well, there's language barriers, which is intimidating.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I just think it's an interesting concept, because in my head I think I saw a movie about Paris, like we should go visit Paris, but you think it's, I've seen it, I've got what I needed to get out of it.
Yeah,
I saw that one French movie that one time.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, I saw that French movie, and they were shooting at each other. I don't know, it doesn't seem safe to me.
It's hysterical. So let's talk about kind of the revisionist history that's been going on lately regarding just sort of the founding of America. And, obviously the founders made a point to say we don't want a state religion.
Yeah.
But people find it so easy to go back and look at what was written and reread it in their own kind of voice.
Yes, there's a lot of, I think, rather desperate attempts to rewrite history. Mm-hmm. It's pretty clear.
Right.
That the founding fathers were quite secular and wanted it that way. And the special pleading on behalf of other views is, I think, pathetic.
Do you think, there's the one phrase, endowed by their creator, do you think that's something they kind of grab onto with both hands?
No, well, that was pre-Darwin.
Sure.
So that kind of language flowed off the tongue in those days quite naturally.
Oh, that makes sense.
And I think that nothing much should be read into that.
What is it about religion that breeds mistrust in science? Or kind of a selective mistrust in science, I guess? Because they're more than willing to use the internet or their car.
Not only do they use the technology, but they would love to use science when they think it can help them. Mm-hmm. I mean, when the Vatican goes to scientists and asks them to study the Shroud of Turin, that's actually a very interesting historical event. It's right there.
Right.
It shows. You know what it shows? To be impolite about it, it shows who's in power now. You would never see National Academy of Sciences going to the Vatican and saying, "Would you validate this result in molecular biology?" Are you kidding? Joke. But the Vatican knows the power of science. Everybody knows the power of science. Mm-hmm. And obviously, if you're a spokesperson for religion that used to be the go-to authority on everything and is no longer the go-to authority, you feel displaced, and you're now uneasily in second or maybe third place.
Sure. And
naturally that breeds resentment. And I think a lot of the liberal thinkers let's just look at Christianity, have made their peace with science, and some of them are now go out of their way to be quite gracefully ecumenical and in tune with science, and they acknowledge science as well. But I think that's been it's been a hard card to play for many of them, and they've played it gracefully and well, but just look at all the ones that won't play it.
Mm-hmm. So talking about your most recent book, I'm sorry, what was the title about clergy?
Caught in the Pulpit.
Do the people who are kind of find themselves in that position of, I know I'm no longer a believer, but this is my job, this is my livelihood, do they feel like they're being dishonest to those who follow them, or what do you think is the mindset there?
Oh, it varies, but yes, so they all are bothered from somewhere from discomfited to in agony, and the spectrum is spread over the amount of dissembling that they are obliged to do. Now, you've got to recognize that everybody who deals, let's say, pastorally with other human beings engages in a lot of diplomacy, a lot of politeness. We don't say things to people that we think will undermine them or hurt them.
Right.
And so we do engage in a lot of diplomatic talk, which seamlessly melds into hypocrisy and outright lying. And there's no bright line anywhere on that scale. And so you can start off being just quiet about your own views and giving metaphorical interpretations of things you say and excusing what you're saying because I'm talking to a sweet little old lady who's going to die in a year or so anyway, and I don't want to disturb her, so I'll tell this little white lie. And that happens to clergy. It happens to all of us, but it happens to them every day. And it mounts and mounts and mounts. And there comes a time when they realize they're just living a lie. Always with the best of intentions. I don't think none of these people went into it for the money, or for the power or the glory. They went into it to serve their fellow human beings, to do good. And then they get trapped. And it's very sad. Some of them, incidentally, don't feel particularly trapped.
Really?
And I don't know how I feel about them. In a few cases, I'm not all that respectful or sympathetic. I think some of them find the life they lead a little too graceful, a little too easy. It would bother me a lot more than it bothers them.
So is it they started religious, became pastors, lost their faith, and are staying purposely, or some of them wouldn't leave even if they could, because it's what they do. It's their life. And some of them wouldn't leave because they can't bear to break all the hearts and the promises that they've made. And when you've married and buried and baptized families and had them confide in you for years, very hard to say, I never believed a word of it. Very hard to do. So their motives for staying are, even when they are economic, which to some degree they are usually, I think, it's hard to fault them. I mean, they don't have any equity in a house. They're living in a parsonage. They got 2 kids that have to go to college. It's, oh my gosh. Well, and they stand to lose every friend they have.
The leap from the pulpit is a mortal leap indeed, and few of them are up for it.
And do they take comfort in finding others who are in the same position, or is that somehow?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And an offshoot of our interviews was the creation of the Clergy Project.
Right.
We didn't create it, although we helped. Linda and I, and Linda's helped more than I had, but I had discussed this sort of thing with Richard Dawkins in the past. And when I suggested it to him, he and the foundation, the Richard Dawkins Foundation, came through with the initial technical expertise to set up their website and some support money. And then, but Richard and I and Linda, we're not members. We have no access to what they do. It's completely closed.
Sure.
It's just for them, and they're very careful about who they let in. And they have hundreds of members. Hundreds.
What's the process like? How do you prove that? How do you
get
prove
vetted.
That?
You get in touch with them. You apply, and you get grilled, and you get checked out. They don't want snoopy journalists or would-be converters or other dissemblers in their midst, and so they have. I don't know the details. All I know is that I know that that's a bottleneck. That their membership is growing and growing. I don't know what it is now. I haven't had it. They send me messages every now and then. Last message I got, it was over, I think, 550, but it must be considerably more than that now. But it takes a while to process a new candidate.
Oh, I'm sure. And is the ultimate goal to provide community, provide them with the skills they may need
to provide them with just emotional support and moral support and a friendly ear and knowledgeable responses, a sympathetic ear to listen and share notes and suggestions. And there's been some people that have found work outside, and there's people that have found all kinds of opportunities within it. I don't know any of the details, but it seems to be thriving.
Do you have any specific thoughts about things like Sunday morning assemblies for secular people who want to gather and be part of the community? It's gotten some kind of vitriol from sort of within the atheist community, and so much that you're mimicking church, and that to them is it. I understand that, but I'm not sympathetic to that vitriol at all. I think some people love music and ceremony, and they love the old songs, and maybe they love the smell of incense. And if they treat it as a kind of theater, I think that's fine. In fact, I got a lot of vitriolic response to a suggestion that I made. That wouldn't it be great if a community theater set up a program of very carefully, accurately, faithfully reproducing religious ceremonies, different one every Sunday. It's a Catholic Latin Mass this Sunday. Next week it's a Quaker meeting, and the week after that it's an evangelical tent meeting, and the week after that we're going to have a Mormon meeting. And snake handling.
right. And you treat it as like going to the opera.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
And I thought what would be really cool is if the one of the local pastors moonlighted by the local Baptist pastor who also plays a Baptist pastor when they do the Baptist pastor ceremony, and then he or she could say to a member of the congregation, you can't come next Sunday. Well, maybe you'd like to come the following Sunday when I'm doing basically the same service in the theater church.
Yeah.
And people could enjoy their love of the music and the ceremony, and they could pass the plate and make the theater go. I think for one thing, I just think it would be nice if there were some alternatives like that out there to, as it were, confuse the opposition. It's a little bit of chaff, making it a little bit harder to, a little bit easier for people to move between communities and put less stress. The main reason I thought of this is I thought it would be valuable if churches could gently move to a position where the presumption that those presiding over the service were believers was diminished.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we take actors seriously, but we don't suppose they believe what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And if we treated them more as professional masters of ceremony and subtracted the idea that they were supposed to be devout, that would go a long way to easing the burden on these folks.
Do you think things like that would serve to help people transition? Because that's what they're used to. They're used to getting up every Sunday morning and going to see people.
I think it might. I know it's weak tea for some people. It's just not. It's just they don't drink near beer. It's got to be the real thing. I've given a couple of Unitarian sermons.
Oh yeah?
Oh yes, and I've been to some Unitarian services. That dates back to my high school days, when my best friend was the organist at the local Unitarian church. I used to go to the services, hang out, sitting on the bench on the organ with. He was a brilliant organist. He made a life of it, in fact. And so I know all about the Unitarians. And I can't stand the words they put to the hymns. I love the hymns because I grew up with them. But they put these tepid, bad poetry, bad lyrics. Mm-hmm. No, if I'm going to sing that hymn, I want the old blood-curdling words, not... I don't believe them, but I want them.
I feel
in the same way, I wouldn't want to go hear Così fan tutte in English.
Right. Yeah,
I could understand the words better, but that's not the point.
I've mentioned that before. I grew up singing in the choir and love it.
Yeah,
love the old religious music and Latin. And it's beautiful, and I love it. And I don't know why. It's just something you grow up with, I guess. Yeah. And there are a few things that are that old that are...
It's important to realize that how much of the affection and allegiance, loyalty that people have to their churches is due to that. Mm-hmm. The churches have, after all, been designed over several millennia to get their clutches into the hearts of the congregation, and for good reason. And we can learn a lot from churches about how to instill community spirit, joy, and break down the egotism of most of daily life. I think there's a lot to learn about that.
And I think I find it interesting that people are so against mimicking churches, because people do crave community. That's fundamental. That's what we all look for. That's why people come to places like this, to TAM, because they want to be surrounded by people they agree with.
Look, why do we have commencement services at universities?
Right.
Why do we have funerals, weddings, ceremonies? Good stuff. Rituals, good. It has a bracing and wonderful and supportive effect on people.
Mm-hmm. Is it okay to not be skeptical about every single thing in your life? Is it okay to kind of take off that hat once in a while and say, like, I just like this song?
Well, I think you can do it without believing. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Miller, the great British orchestra conductor, opera director, scientist, TV presenter, polymath, he's a friend of mine. And I once went, he was doing the St. Matthew Passion of Bach at BAM, at Brooklyn Academy of Music. The most moving musical experience maybe of my life, just absolutely thrilling. Mm-hmm. And of course the music and the words, this is the story of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Miller, born a Jew, complete atheist, did that wonderful documentary on the history of atheism.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely brilliant realization of this music. You couldn't do it any better. Mm-hmm. Didn't believe a word of it, but he loves it.
Well, I mean, you read Romeo and Juliet and you cry. You don't believe Romeo and Juliet were real people for a second. I think people absolutely can separate those two things. Well, we are just about at a half hour.
Yeah, good time to close up.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.
I look forward to seeing your talk shortly.
Yeah. Yes, it will be shortly.
Indeed. And thank you for joining us. This is Jessica Blimke with the Friendly Atheist Podcast. You can find us at friendlyatheist.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast for friendlyatheist.com.
Our theme song was written and performed by Brad Chagdis, and thanks to Michael Greif for helping us with on-site recording.
If you like what you're hearing, please consider making a contribution at patreon.com/Hemant. That's He-Man T. We appreciate your support. I'm Hemant Mehta.
And I'm Jessica Blimke.
We hope you join us next time.